Walk into Grand Central Terminal in New York City. Look up. The ceiling is 125 feet above your head. That's 12 stories, higher than most apartment buildings. In a train station, for people boarding trains. This isn't speculation, this is measured, documented, verifiable. The main concourse ceiling reaches 125 feet at its highest point. You can measure it yourself. Now ask yourself, why? Why does a train station, a place where people buy tickets, board trains, carry luggage, need a ceiling higher than a 10-story building? The official explanation is straightforward. Grandeur, civic pride. The Beaux-Arts architectural movement celebrated monumentality. These buildings were designed to inspire, to project power, to make citizens feel part of something greater than themselves. This makes perfect sense. It's documented. It's taught in architecture schools. It's accepted history. But I want to show you the actual measurements, the specific numbers, building after building, space after space, all constructed during the same brief historical period, all with the same impractical, excessive vertical space, and let you decide if civic pride fully explains what we're seeing. Let me start with what's undeniable. The measurements themselves. Grand Central Terminal, New York City, opened 1913. Main concourse, 275 feet long, 120 feet wide, 125 feet high. That ceiling height again, 125 feet, equivalent to a 12-story building. The space is designed for people, average height around 5 to 6 feet, to walk through by tickets and board trains. Why 125 feet overhead? The official answer, the space was modeled after Roman baths. Architects Warren and Wetmore and Reed and Stem wanted to evoke the grandeur of ancient Rome. The ceiling features a painted astronomical mural, Mediterranean sky with 2,500 stars. Beautiful, inspiring, monumental, but practical for moving passengers through a train station? Look at modern train stations, even large ones. Let me give you specific examples. Chicago Union Station. The Great Hall has a ceiling around 115 feet high. Still impressive. But the passenger concourse, where people actually buy tickets and board trains, about 50 feet. Still grand, still impressive, but less than half the height of Grand Central. Why did Grand Central need more than double that? London's King's Cross Station. Renovated concourse has a ceiling about 65 feet at its highest point, handles similar passenger volumes to Grand Central. Functions perfectly well with half the ceiling height. Modern airport terminals serve as another comparison. These buildings handle far more passengers than any train station in history. Denver International Airport main terminal. The distinctive tent-like peaks reach about 126 feet, comparable to Grand Central, but those peaks are over the ticket counters and baggage claim. The actual concourses where passengers walk to gates, about 20 to 30 feet. Normal functional heights. Why can modern airports handle 70 million passengers per year with 20 to 30 foot concourse ceilings, while 1913 Grand Central needed 125 feet for far fewer passengers? The official answer, modern building techniques allow for wider spans with lower ceilings, better ventilation systems, different aesthetic values, all true. But it doesn't explain why the 1913 ceiling had to be so high in the first place. Adequate ventilation can be achieved with 40 to 50 foot ceilings. Good acoustics don't require 125 feet. Impressive architecture can be created at any scale, so why did they build it that tall? Union Station, Washington, D.C., opened 1907. Main hall, 120 feet wide, 219 feet long, 96 feet high. Not quite as tall as Grand Central, but close. 96 feet. That's still a 9-story building, for a waiting room. The ceiling is barrel vaulted, decorated with gold leaf, modeled after the baths of Diocletian in Rome. Absolutely stunning craftsmanship. But again, why 96 feet for people sitting on benches waiting for trains? Modern airport terminals, which handle far more passengers than Union Station ever did, rarely exceed 30 to 40 feet in ceiling height. Even that feels cavernous. What purpose does an additional 50 to 60 feet of empty air serve? The concourse adjacent to the main hall is even more remarkable. It stretches 760 feet long with a 45-foot ceiling. That's over 2 city blocks of enclosed space with ceilings high enough to fit a 4-story building inside. For passenger circulation, New York Public Library, main branch, opened 1911, Rose, Maine. Reading room, 78 feet wide, 297 feet long, 52 feet high, 52 feet, 5 stories, for people sitting at desks reading books. The Bill Blass Public Catalog Room, 81 feet long, 77 feet wide, 52 feet high, again 52 feet, for people looking up books in a card catalog. Even the entrance lobby, Astor Hall, has a 34-foot ceiling, 3 stories high, for people walking into a library. The official explanation is the Beaux-Arts style. Why? These buildings were designed to inspire learning, to create temple-like spaces for knowledge, to elevate the act of reading into something sacred. Beautiful concept, historically documented, architecturally coherent, but walk into a modern library, even a grand one. Ceilings are typically 12 to 16 feet. Enough for good acoustics, enough for an open feeling, but nothing like 52 feet. What functional purpose does the additional 30 to 40 feet of vertical space serve for someone reading a book? James A. Farley Post Office, New York City, opened 1914, main postal lobby, 2 stories tall, approximately 40 feet high. Mail sorting room, 47-foot ceiling with ornate dome. Postal dock, 30-foot ceiling. This is a post office, people mailing letters, buying stamps, sorting mail. Why does a mail sorting room need a 47-foot domed ceiling? Modern post offices have 10 to 12-foot ceilings. Plenty of room for mail sorting equipment, for workers, for ventilation. The Farley Building's office space, added during restoration, has slab heights over 17 feet. That's twice the height of standard office ceilings today. These aren't estimates. These are documented measurements from architectural records, building specifications, historical surveys. You can visit these buildings, you can stand in them, you can measure the excessive vertical space yourself. The pattern is undeniable, and it's not limited to a few famous buildings, state capitol buildings. Nearly all built during the same period, 1870 to 1910, feature the same excessive ceiling heights. Let me give you specific measurements. These aren't estimates, these are documented architectural specifications. The Texas State Capitol, rotunda height 218 feet to the star at the apex of the dome. That's a 20-story building. The rotunda itself is 66 feet in diameter. The entire interior volume rises over 200 feet above the floor where legislators walk. What legislative function requires 218 feet of vertical space? Minnesota State Capitol, dome interior height, approximately 223 feet. The building was completed in 1905 at a cost of $4.5 million, equivalent to over $150 million today. Much of that cost went into engineering the massive dome and its supporting structure. The dome features the second largest self-supported marble dome in the world. Only St. Peter's Basilica in Rome is larger. For a state government building in Minnesota, why does Minnesota's legislature need a dome second only to the Vatican? Pennsylvania State Capitol, dome interior approximately 272 feet, nearly as tall as a 27-story building, modeled directly after St. Peter's Basilica. President Theodore Roosevelt attended the dedication in 1906 and called it the handsomest building I ever saw. Beautiful, absolutely. But practical for government functions? The legislators occupy rooms with normal 12-foot ceilings. Committee meetings happen in standard office spaces. Only the rotunda and dome spaces reach these extraordinary heights. Kansas State Capitol, dome height 304 feet. Construction began in 1866, but the dome wasn't completed until 1903. It took nearly 40 years to build. The dome interior rises nearly 300 feet above the floor for visitors and tourists to look up at. The actual government work happens in normal height rooms surrounding this central void. Or Iowa State Capitol, 5 domes, with the central dome reaching over 275 feet. The only 5-dome capitol in America, built 1871 to 1886. Each dome required massive engineering, cast iron frameworks, elaborate stone or metal exteriors, decorative interiors. Why 5 domes? Why not 1? What functional purpose did the additional 4 domes serve? The official answer is architectural distinction. Iowa wanted their capital to be unique, memorable, impressive. Fine. But at what cost? Each additional dome required massive structural engineering, additional materials, more complex construction, higher maintenance costs. For appearance, Wisconsin State Capitol, dome height 284 feet, interior volume larger than the U.S. Capitol dome. The rotunda floor is surrounded by 4 wings, each with their own high ceilings, though nothing approaching the central dome height. Colorado State Capitol, dome exterior, height 272 feet, interior rotunda about 180 feet high. The dome is plated with real gold leaf, symbolically expensive but functionally unnecessary. Michigan State Capitol, built 1873 to 1879, interior dome, height 160 feet. Features elaborate cast iron and glass ceiling in the rotunda. The engineering required to support glass and iron at 160 feet would have been complex and expensive in the 1870s. Every one of these capitals built within the same 50-year period. Everyone featuring dramatically excessive vertical space in public areas. Everyone requiring sophisticated engineering to support these spaces. These aren't just random numbers. These are consistent patterns across buildings separated by thousands of miles, built by different architects, funded by different state governments, all during the same historical window when excessive ceiling heights became normal for major public buildings. Before 1870, state capitals had modest heights, functional spaces, adequate grandeur, but nothing like this scale. After 1920, new government buildings abandoned this approach. Modern state office buildings have normal ceiling heights throughout, but during that 50-year window, building after building with 200-foot, 250-foot, 300-foot interior heights. For state legislatures, train stations, post offices, libraries, government buildings, museums, all constructed during the same 40 to 50-year period. All with ceiling heights 2, 3, 4 times taller than necessary for human use. Let me be very clear about what I'm claiming and what I'm not claiming. I'm not claiming these buildings are ancient. Construction records exist. Photographs document the building process. We know who designed them, who built them, when they were completed. I'm not claiming giants built them. There's no evidence for giants. Skeleton claims have all been debunked. Photographic evidence of giant skeletons is consistently proven false. What I'm asking is this. Does the official explanation of civic pride and Beaux-Arts grandeur fully account for the extreme impracticality of these spaces? Because here's what bothers me about the pattern. These buildings don't just have tall ceilings. They have precisely engineered tall ceilings with sophisticated acoustic properties, elaborate ventilation systems, and structural designs that seem to serve purposes beyond simple aesthetics. Grand Central's ceiling isn't just tall, it's an elliptical barrel vault with perfect acoustics. There's a famous whispering gallery near the Oyster Bar where you can whisper in one corner and be heard clearly in the opposite corner 50 feet away. Why engineer such sophisticated acoustics into a train station if the purpose is just visual grandeur? Union Station's main hall has a coffered ceiling, not just decorative, but structurally significant. The coffers reduce the ceiling's weight while maintaining the vault's strength. This is sophisticated engineering. But why use sophisticated weight reduction techniques if you're deliberately building an impractically tall ceiling just for show? The New York Public Library's Rose Main Reading Room has no interior columns. The 52-foot ceiling spans 78 feet width without any support. This requires tremendous structural engineering. Modern buildings rarely attempt column-free spans of that size even at normal ceiling heights. It's difficult and expensive. Why go to such engineering extremes for a library reading room if the only goal is to look impressive? Here's another question nobody asks. Where are the rooms built for normal height people? These buildings have massive public halls with 40 to 50 to 100-foot ceilings, but they also have offices, storage rooms, mechanical spaces, areas not meant for public display. What are the ceiling heights in those spaces? I looked into this. Grand Central Terminal has hundreds of non-public spaces, service corridors, mechanical rooms, storage areas, even a secret basement level called M42 that housed power converters. Those spaces? Normal ceiling heights, 8 to 10 feet. Standard for the era. Same pattern at Union Station, same at the New York Public Library, same at state capitals. The private spaces, the places not meant for the public, have normal human scale proportions. Only the public spaces have the excessive heights. This tells us something important. The builders knew how to construct normal ceiling heights. They chose not to in specific spaces. Why? The official answer is simple. Public spaces were meant to inspire. Private spaces were purely functional. Makes sense. Logical. Economically sound even. Why waste money on tall ceilings where no one will see them? But consider the extra cost involved in building at these heights. A 125-foot ceiling versus a 40-foot ceiling requires materials. 3 times the stone or brick for walls, 3 times the decorative plaster for ceilings, or 3 times the scaffolding for construction. The painted astronomical ceiling in Grand Central covers 2,500 square feet and contains 2,500 individual stars. All of this had to be constructed, painted, and installed 125 feet above the floor using 1910s technology. Structural engineering. Taller spaces require dramatically stronger foundations and support structures. The load calculations become more complex. The margin for error decreases. Every additional foot of height adds exponential structural challenges. Grand Central's ceiling isn't just high. It's a barrel vault that spans 120 feet width without interior supports. This required sophisticated understanding of compression, tension, and load distribution. In 1910, construction difficulty. Lifting materials to 125 feet in 1910 meant horses, pulleys, and manual labor. No motorized cranes, no modern lifting equipment. Every stone block, every decorative element, every piece of the ceiling had to be hauled up manually. The ceiling of Union Station's main hall is decorated with 23-karat gold leaf. Applying gold leaf to a ceiling 96 feet high from scaffolding by hand is extraordinarily difficult and time-consuming. After the 2011 earthquake damaged the ceiling, restoration took 3 years and cost millions of dollars. Workers had to install elaborate steel support systems above the ceiling, replaster damaged sections, and reapply over 120,000 sheets of gold leaf. This gives us a glimpse of what the original construction must have entailed. Heating and cooling. Heating a space with a 125-foot ceiling in winter requires enormous fuel expenditure. Hot air rises, most of the heat ends up near the ceiling. Far above the people, it's meant to warm. In the early 1900s, buildings were heated with coal-fired boilers and steam radiators. Heating Grand Central's main concourse would have required massive amounts of coal and an enormous boiler system. Modern buildings avoid excessive ceiling heights partly for this reason. Energy efficiency. Why heat or cool air that serves no purpose? Maintenance. Everything eventually needs maintenance. Paint fades, plaster cracks. Decorative elements need cleaning. In 2014, a rosette fell from the ceiling of the New York Public Library's Rose Main Reading Room. The entire 52-foot ceiling was immediately inspected. Every rosette tested for stability. The restoration took over 2 years and cost $12 million for ceiling maintenance. If the ceiling had been 20 feet instead of 52 feet, the maintenance would be simpler, safer, and dramatically cheaper. The cost differential between a 20-foot ceiling and a 125-foot ceiling isn't linear, it's exponential. Yet cities and institutions across America paid this premium, repeatedly, during the same brief historical period. Grand Central Terminal cost approximately $80 million to build in 1913, equivalent to over $2 billion today. A significant portion of that cost went into creating the massive vertical spaces. Union Station in Washington, D.C. cost $25 million in 1908, over $800 million in modern dollars. Again, much of that cost related to the monumental scale of the main hall and concourse. The New York Public Library cost $9 million in 1911, over $280 million today. The Rose Main Reading Room's 52-foot ceiling required custom engineering, no interior columns, special roof trusses, elaborate ceiling decoration. These weren't minor cost overruns. These were deliberate decisions to spend enormous sums creating impractical vertical space. Was it really just for civic pride, or was there a functional reason we're not being told? Let me show you the timeline again, because the pattern is striking. Grand Central Terminal, 1903 to 1913. Union Station, D.C., 1905 to 1908. New York Public Library, 1902 to 1911. Farley Post Office, 1911 to 1914. Pennsylvania State. Capital, 1902 to 1906. Minnesota. State Capital, 1896 to 1905. Texas State Capital, 1882 to 1888. All during the same period. Roughly 1880 to 1915, 35 years. Before this period, government buildings and train stations had normal ceiling heights, functional, adequate, but not monumental. After this period, the style declined. By the 1920s to 1940s, Art Deco buildings had dramatic designs, but much more modest ceiling heights. By the 1950s to 1970s, brutalism and modernism used low ceilings as a design principle. But during that specific 35-year window, dozens of major American cities built massive public buildings with ceiling heights that served no obvious practical function. Is this really just architectural fashion? Or does it suggest something else? Something about the intended use of these spaces that we're not being told? Let me present 3 possible interpretations. I'm not claiming to know which is correct. I'm showing you the evidence and the theories. Theory 1, civic pride and Beaux-Arts movement, official explanation. America was rising as a world power during 1880 to 1915. Cities competed for prestige. The Beaux-Arts architectural style, imported from France, emphasized grandeur and classical proportions. Buildings with soaring ceilings projected permanence, sophistication, connection to ancient civilizations. They made citizens feel proud. They impressed foreign visitors. They justified the expense through cultural value. This is documented. Historical records support it, architectural historians teach it, and it might be completely sufficient to explain the pattern. Theory 2, acoustic and energy properties. Some researchers suggest these spaces were designed for acoustic resonance or energy purposes that we no longer understand. The specific ceiling heights, 96 feet, 125 feet, 52 feet, might relate to harmonic frequencies. The coffers, vaults, and domes aren't just decorative but functional for sound or energy manipulation. What this theory points to the sophisticated acoustic properties many of these buildings possess: the whispering galleries, the perfect sound distribution, the resonance characteristics. Could these buildings have served some purposes related to sound, frequency, or energy that official history doesn't acknowledge? I can't prove this. There's no documentary evidence, but the pattern of acoustic engineering in supposedly decorative spaces raises questions. Theory 3. Inherited or repurposed structures. This is the most speculative theory, but worth considering. What if some of these buildings weren't built for their current purpose? What if they were constructed, or partially constructed, for uses that required massive vertical space, then later adapted for train stations, libraries, and post offices? This would explain why the public spaces are so impractically tall, why private spaces have normal heights, why the buildings cluster in the same time period, why similar designs appear across the country. If these spaces originally housed different functions, markets, energy systems, gathering halls for taller beings, or purposes we can't imagine, then later, conversion to train stations and libraries would require minimal changes to the massive public halls, but standard construction for added offices and private spaces. I acknowledge this is speculation. Official construction records contradict it. Photographs show these buildings being constructed during claimed dates. But the pattern makes me wonder. Here's why this matters. If Theory 1 is correct, if this is simply civic pride and architectural fashion, then we're looking at an interesting historical period where America chose to invest enormous resources in beautiful, impractical spaces. That's fine. That's culture. That's what civilizations do. But if Theory 2 or Theory 3 has merit, if these spaces were designed for purposes beyond what we're told, then we're looking at a different kind of historical question. What were these buildings really for? What functions required 125-foot ceilings? What knowledge of acoustics, energy, or engineering did the builders possess that we've lost or never acknowledged? I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm asking you to look. Next time you visit Grand Central Terminal, stand in the main concourse. Look up at that 125-foot ceiling. Ask yourself, what is all that space for? Not symbolically, not aesthetically, functionally? What purpose does 125 feet of empty air serve for someone buying a train ticket? Visit your state capitol. Stand in the rotunda. Look up at ceilings 200 plus feet high. Ask yourself, why does a government building need this much vertical space? Walk into a historic post office. Look at 40-foot ceilings above service windows. Ask yourself, why does mailing a letter require this much overhead room? The official answer is, it doesn't. It's decorative, it's symbolic, it's cultural. Maybe that's true. But consider the alternative. What if the height wasn't decorative? What if it was functional, for purposes we no longer understand or acknowledge? What if these buildings were designed for something other than their current use? And we've simply forgotten, or been told to forget, what that original purpose was. I can't prove this. Historical records say these buildings were designed and built exactly as claimed. For train stations, for libraries, for post offices, but the measurements don't lie. The pattern is real. Dozens of buildings, all constructed 1880 to 1915, all with ceiling heights 2, 3, 4 times taller than necessary, all requiring enormous extra expense and sophisticated engineering, all during the same period when Tartaria disappeared from maps, when streets were raised and buried original ground floors, when old buildings were demolished and replaced, the same 35 to 50-year historical window. Is this coincidence or pattern? The standard answer is coincidence, architectural fashion. Industrial Revolution prosperity allowing expensive civic monuments, or all independent developments. Maybe that's sufficient. But the measurements are undeniable. 125 feet, 96 feet, 52 feet, 47 feet. The timeline is undeniable. 1880 to 1915. The impracticality is undeniable. No modern building would waste that much vertical space for those functions. You decide. Is it civic pride? Acoustic engineering? Inherited structures from a previous purpose? Whatever the answer, the buildings are there. The measurements are real. The pattern exists. And someone, for some reason, during a very specific period in history, decided that train stations needed ceilings as high as 12-story buildings, maybe to inspire travelers, or maybe for something else entirely. Look up, measure, question. The space above your head is waiting for an explanation.